My name is Lena Morales. I'm 32, and 3 months ago, my fiancé told me, flat and casual as if ordering coffee, "Your brother can't be at the wedding. He'll ruin the photos." I said, "Then there is no wedding." We met at a friend's backyard barbecue, the kind of party where half the city collapses into conversations you can't remember the next day and the other half become the pivot points of your life. Ethan Parker laughed too easily, wore designer denim like it didn't try, and had that polished, practiced charm people mistake for warmth. He swept into my life with restaurant reservations and weekend plans. 2 years later, we were engaged. We picked a venue, shelled out deposits, and folded Ethan's tidy future into what I assumed would be mine as well. But there are things you can only learn up close. My younger brother, Tommy, is 27, autistic, high-functioning, devoted to routine, quick to laugh when he's comfortable, and awkwardly brilliant about trains. He has worked at the library for 5 years. He collects model engines down to the gauge and can recite timetables like scripture. When our parents died, I became his guardian. We rebuilt a life around his schedules: the Saturday train museum, the weekday rhythm of the library shift, the Sunday dinners that kept us all human. Ethan knew about Tommy. He'd met him a few times. Polite, the brief jokes, the manufactured interest. For a while, everything was fine. But slowly, the conversations shifted. Boundaries started as little suggestions. "Does Tommy need to come to every vendor meeting?" Ethan asked once over wine and a planning notebook. Maybe he'd be more comfortable staying home for the rehearsal dinner. He framed it like concern, like care. He slid options that sounded reasonable: a quiet room with a helper on call, a live video of the ceremony, a handler to manage any disruptions. His voice had the soft, reasonable pivot of someone who knew how to make entitlement sound compassionate. Then, one night in our kitchen, surrounded by the leaflets and quotes and the thing we thought of as a future, he crossed the line. He put his hand on the counter and said it plainly. "Lena, your brother can't be at the ceremony. He'll make people uncomfortable. He'll ruin the photos." The words were clinical, like a line in a brochure, not a question, a verdict. You don't have to ask for permission to feel how something lands in your chest. I felt it like an electric shock. Not just the sting for me, but the cruelty to Tommy sitting in his routines, the way someone else had decided he was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. "Ethan," I said, and I remember the smallness of the kitchen light across his face. "Tommy is my family." He looked at me the way men look at a glass they've never learned how to refill, puzzled, mildly inconvenienced. "I'm not trying to be cruel. I just want the day to be perfect. These photos, Lena, they're forever. I can't risk everything for unpredictability." The word he used, unpredictability, landed like an accusation toward my brother's very existence. I felt something inside me fold, then harden. "You want me to decide between my brother and our wedding?" I asked. My voice was quiet, but it cut a clearness through the air. "That's not a choice I make, not for anyone." Ethan's jaw tightened. He began enumerating logistics with that practiced managerial tone: venue lighting, guests' comfort, the wedding planner's suggestions. He slid a Pinterest board across the table. Solutions. It was a curated little empire of how to edit people out of perfection. Quiet rooms labeled sensory relief, handlers, even examples of Photoshop edits where a face could be softened or removed for the final album. The absurdity tasted like betrayal. "You'd really hire someone to remove my brother from the photos?" I said. The shock in my voice stopped him for a beat. He smiled that small, self-satisfied smile. "I just want the wedding to be about us." There was a pivot point you recognize in retrospect, the moment when the person you thought you were building a life with chooses the idea of an image over a human being who'd always been faithful to you. That night, I did something I still surprise myself for being able to do. I packed his engagement ring, I took down the dress appointment from the calendar, and I told him we were done. I told him to leave. He called it dramatic. He called it unreasonable. "You'll regret this," he said, as if regret were a currency he could spend on me later. He left that night in a tidy, furious blur. The apartment felt suddenly too big for one person and too small for what had been promised. Within 24 hours, the drama that should have stayed private spilled across the internet. Ethan, of course he went public. He posted a version of events that fit him like a suit: After 2 years of planning, my fiancé chose her brother over our future. I can't support being with someone who'd make a family stand against us on our wedding day. I'm heartbroken, but I deserve better. The post was perfunctory, polished. It read like a press release, and it landed like a bomb. People reacted the way social media does to a neat, moral-looking story. Friends took sides without asking for receipts. My phone lit up, angry messages from acquaintances I barely spoke to, panicked texts from family who could not yet parse the reality, calls from my mother's friend Linda, who always had been a soft place for both of us. "You did the right thing," Linda said, voice full of an aunt's certainty. "Tommy's worth 1,000 weddings. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." It was the kind of clarity that steadied me for a breath. But the noise kept coming. Ethan's mother called, the panic and entitlement in her voice a professional thing now. "Lena, this wedding, this is ridiculous," she said. "How can you throw away a wedding over photographs?" The accusation carried the casual cruelty of people who value optics as proof of human worth. Within a week, the nice, polished public performance turned into a campaign. Ethan's friends, the Flying Monkeys, messaged employers, called vendors, and tried to marshal the social forces that punish people who defy the comfortable script. "You're ruining deposits," someone texted. "You need to reimburse me," Ethan's mother wrote. It's amazing how fast people will line up to be offended on someone else's behalf when it gives them something to prove. Through it all, Tommy was my constant. He didn't understand the architecture of social media, but he felt tremors. The hushed questions from neighbors, the stress in my voice when I tried to keep things normal. He wanted pizza for dinner and to watch the same train documentary he'd watched 10 times this month. We kept our rituals because rituals are where safety hides. And then something small happened, the kind of human moment that fiction filmmakers seek because it cuts through melodrama the way sunlight cuts through smoke. One Friday night, Tommy and I wandered into a little board game cafe that hosts low-sensory nights. He started talking about trains, routes, timetables, the precise differences between HO and N scale, and we found a table with a woman who listened like she'd been waiting to hear that exact story. She laughed at his jokes, asked intelligent questions about gauges, and made space for him without a blink. We exchanged names. "I'm Lena, she's Erin." No, wait, this is where the memory flips in detail. For now, she was kind. That kindness lingered like a promise the way real warmth does. But the promise of kindness was still far from the present. Right now, the fight had just started. I canceled a wedding and reclaimed my choices. In return, I invited a storm of social consequences. I felt raw, yes, but also strangely clear. You either accept people as they are, or you accept a version of them that erases who you love. I chose family. The internet hummed, the deposits hung in the balance, and in the kitchen where Ethan had once sorted centerpieces, the light tasted different, less gilded, more honest. The social media storm arrived like weather, sudden, loud, and something everyone wanted to stand in the doorway and talk about while pretending not to get wet. Ethan's post had been neat and moral sounding. The comment thread chewed the nuance into bite-sized outrage. Friends I'd known since college took positions the way people pick teams for a game they've never played. Cousins called. Old coworkers texted. People offered opinions as if they were the sort of thing you mail back with a stamped reply. At first, I tried to keep the private things private. I kept screenshots. I blocked numbers. I answered only when it mattered. But the public version of us, the curated Ethan and Lena we'd been selling to vendors and family, was gone, and in its place was a narrative I didn't recognize. The woman who canceled a wedding because she refused to sacrifice a family member's dignity. In some rooms, that sentence felt heroic. In others, it read like an overreaction fit for a tabloid. Ethan's narrative was simple and performative. He framed himself as heartbroken, hurt, the man wronged by a fiancé who allegedly prioritized a family member over love. His friends posted sympathetic comments. His mother called my phone and used words like nonsense and ruining, and told me, with the casual, cruel conviction of entitlement, that a wedding day should be perfect, no complications allowed. "They're only worried about deposits," she said at one point, voice silk smooth on the phone. "That's what this is about." People who live in the vocabulary of privilege are never short on rationalizations. Deposits, logistics, Ruined images, these are code words for, I can't have what I want if the world looks messy. They know how to weaponize sympathy, and they do it well. Then the flying monkeys started, the maid of honor who showed up at the boutique to ask me to reconsider for everyone's sake, a vendor who suggested mediation as though my brother were a production delay, a series of passive-aggressive messages from acquaintances who wanted me to see reason and stop being dramatic. My phone filled with screenshots and threats and pleas. Some messages were cruel, some were performative grief. A few were oddly practical, requests for refunds, calls about contracts. Someone even messaged my workplace with vague accusations. Human Resources took one look at the trail of messages and suggested I document everything. So I did. It's astonishing how quickly people will rally behind the performance of hurt without asking who was actually harmed. I took screenshots. I saved the texts. I made a folder on my laptop labeled Evidence, like I was preparing for a small, miserable war. It felt ridiculous and also necessary. When you live in a house of thin-skinned entitlement, proof becomes your armor. The ugly public chatter sent tremors through home life. Tommy noticed the quiet shifts in tone, the way I whispered into the phone. He asked about it one evening. As we ate the frozen pizza he always insisted on for comfort food. Is Ethan mad? He asked, eyes serious and kind and entirely himself. He's disappointed, I said, and it felt like a soft word. But I did what I think is right. He nodded, accepted the answer, and launched into a monologue about locomotive gauges that made us both laugh until our shoulders ached. The routines kept us tethered. Rituals are small resistances against the world's tendency to complicate what's simple. A shared joke, a favorite documentary, the ritual of placing his model trains on the same shelf in the same order. The harassment turned physical and careless before it turned legal. Ethan started showing up at places he knew I'd be. A boutique trunk show, the gym, one time even at Tommy's library. At first it felt like an accident. Then the pattern showed its teeth. Tommy came home anxious after the library incident, breathless and confused by a stranger's insinuations. I called the number that had texted threats and asked them to stop. Silence. Then a friend of Ethan's calling, politely insisting, we should talk. That's how it escalates. Polite insistence that quickly becomes pressure, and then pressure becomes entitlement behind a polite veneer. When someone begins to feel like they can rearrange your life without consequence, the only language left is documentation and, if necessary, the law. A week into the storm, I filed for a temporary restraining order. The judge issued it the same day after I presented a curated, ugly collage of messages, a pattern of appearances, and a narrative that had crossed the line into harassment. The relief was not cinematic. It was a slow, exhausted exhale that happened in the courthouse stairwell when I realized there might be actual boundaries the law would enforce. That legal moment was a sharp hinge between two versions of my life, the one where we had a picture-perfect wedding and the one I had chosen instead, a quieter life with messy truths and honest love. The court placed a line in ink. Ethan was not to contact me. He was not to come near Tommy's workplace. It read like protection, and it felt like permission to breathe. The quiet that followed provided a space I didn't know I had been missing. In that space, small, real things began to appear. I went with Tommy to the sensory-friendly night at the board game cafe because he'd been asking for it. An easy request, a small escape. The cafe had warm wood tables, low lights, and a corner cornered off for people who needed it quieter. There was a hum of dice and soft laughter and the smell of coffee that wasn't trying too hard. That's where I met Noah Reyes. Noah was late 20s, patient in a way that looked effortless because it came from a practiced compassion, not a performance. He was there with his nephew, a kid who loved building forts and calling them locomotives. Noah listened to Tommy the way good listeners do, with eyes that didn't wander and echoes that reflected back understanding. When Tommy launched into an excited, detailed explanation about HO gauge versus N scale, Noah's face lit up in that open, surprised way people get when they meet someone who knows what they're talking about. We started with small talk. Who won at the cooperative game we'd been playing? Where was the best coffee in the neighborhood? And then the conversation stripe widened. Noah didn't pry. He didn't offer opinions from some pedestal of advice. He asked 2 or 3 curious questions and let Tommy answer them like the small, proud oracle he is. Later, Noah walked us to the bus stop and helped Tommy carry a box of an old model engine Tommy had found at a flea market. The gesture was small, ordinary, but heavy with meaning. For the first time in weeks, there was a person in my life who didn't editorialize my family. He simply wanted to know us. He wanted to be present. It felt radical. That night, I went to bed tired and quiet and oddly hopeful. The internet still buzzed. Ethan's posts did too, but now they were being met by a chorus I hadn't expected. People who'd been on the sidelines were asking questions. Screenshots leaked of his more vitriolic messages. Someone posted a timeline that painted a different picture. The very existence of context can be lethal to a neat lie. The fight was far from over. There would be court dates, more petty legal threats, and maybe more public theatrics. But in the small cafe with the dice and the soft light, when Noah waved as he walked away and Tommy smiled and called after him about a spare wheel he'd found, there was a demonstration of the future I wanted, imperfect, loving, and not ashamed of who we were. The restraining order felt official, the way a stamp feels on paper, final enough to be real, but not so loud it erased the echo of everything that had happened. In the days after the courthouse, life rearranged itself into a new kind of normal, one with boundaries drawn in ink and people who had to learn where they could no longer step. Ethan didn't go quietly. He tried the softer tactics first. Messages sent through friends, vague third-party pleas for closure, a flurry of passive-aggressive social posts that read like grief counseling manuals. He wanted the narrative back, to pull the threads of the story into an image where he was wronged and I was cruel. But the thing about truth is that it accumulates. It's a slow, patient weight that eventually sinks the flimsy floats of a polished lie. Meanwhile, Noah became a steady presence in the small, practical ways that matter most. He'd text to check on Tommy after a long day at the library. He brought extra granola bars when we went to the train museum because he'd noticed Tommy liked the ones with chocolate chips. He didn't perform kindness. He practiced it. Watching him with Tommy was like watching someone learn the rhythm of a song and then hum it out loud. So natural it felt like it had always been there. One evening, after a pottery class I'd tried to take to keep my hands busy, I found Noah on the sidewalk with Tommy, crouched over a tiny train car Tommy had repaired with superglue and a lot of careful patience. "You fixed it," Noah said simply, as if it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Tommy grinned, like someone who'd won a prize. "It needed a new axle. I improvised." Noah's face lit with genuine curiosity. "Can you show me how you measured it? I'd love to see your process." This, again, was the thing that disarmed me. Instead of pity or awkward smiles, Noah wanted to learn. He treated Tommy's interests like a window into who he was, not a problem to be hidden away. But Ethan's turmoil bled into the edges of our life like oil into water, slow, staining. He started showing more publicly, corners where he could cause friction without directly breaking the restraining order. He turned up at mutual friends' events and left pointed comments on posts about our lives. He tried to make me small by implying I'd weaponize my brother as some kind of rehearsal for moral grandstanding. The entitlement was exhausting because it was relentless. One afternoon, an email arrived at work that read, like someone had collected all the worst parts of a rumor mill and sewn them into a formal complaint. Someone had suggested I was unfit to handle certain responsibilities because of personal instability. HR called me into a hushed office and asked if I'd like them to liaise with the police. I handed them the folder of screenshots I'd been building, texts, voicemail transcripts, dates and times of public appearances, and I felt oddly proud of the mundane, meticulous record-keeping that had become our armor. The legal wheels turned slowly but decisively. At the hearing, Ethan's arguments curdled into thin air. He tried to frame his stalking as concern. He tried to paint my refusal as vindictiveness. But judges are rarely moved by theatricality. They're moved by patterns, documented patterns. The judge extended the restraining order, made it longer, and spelled out specific prohibitions against contacting Tommy or appearing near his workplace. Ink had teeth now. After the hearing, the relief was less ecstatic and more practical. An extra lock on the door, a text thread to confirm that people would not show up unannounced at the library, safer routines. The stakes were still there. Legalities and pettiness don't erase the subtle social harm done, but the guardrails allowed me to plan without flinching. In that quieter space, my relationship with Noah deepened. We weren't cinematic in a rush. Our closeness was found in the small rhythms. picking up a spare book at the library for Tommy, trading playlists of music we liked for working hours, the way Noah noticed the way I stayed up late, rereading Tommy's favorite kids' train books to fall asleep. He was the person who would show up with takeout when I'd had a hard day and sit on the couch without needing to fix anything, just presence as a balm. He wasn't blind to the ugly parts either. He sat with me when posts about the drama resurfaced. He listened to my anger, my sadness, and the practical anxieties about deposits and potential lawsuits. He didn't counsel me to take the high road. He reminded me that the high road was only valuable when you weren't alone on it. He joined my corner of the world without demanding it become his stage. Tommy responded to Noah the way only a person at ease does, with guarded curiosity that became trust. There was a slow handoff of intimacy, Tommy showing Noah the miniature train shelf, Noah remembering to ask about the spare coupler he mentioned once, Noah coming early to help set up a small celebration when Tommy completed a volunteer shift at the library. It felt like family being extended on purpose. Then Ethan shifted registers again, this time using the court of public sympathy as a blunt instrument. He and his mother launched a barrage of accusations, threats to sue for canceled deposits, claims that my refusal to proceed with the wedding had caused emotional distress so crushing it justified legal action. They even started a crowdfunding page framed as a recovery fund for trauma caused by a duplicitous partner, seeking tens of thousands in donations. The audacity was the kind that made your stomach twist. They had the gall to claim victimhood for a woman who'd tried to erase my brother from our life. I watched the GoFundMe climb a few $100s, donations from people who hadn't bothered to ask what actually happened, and then stall. The internet is a fickle jury, and while some will always rally to any neat story of hurt, the broader reality is messier. People began to talk back. Screenshots of Ethan's harsher messages surfaced. Private conversations leaked into public context, and the pile of curated evidence I'd made finally started to matter in the court of public opinion, as much as it did in a real courtroom. Through it all, the life we'd been trying to protect continued. We kept rituals, Thursday pizza nights, rides to the train museum, quiet evenings with the documentary Tommy loved. The ordinary pleasures we once took for granted became the architecture of safety. Noah learned to time his laughter with Tommy's sudden bursts of joy. He became someone who, when Tommy wanted to rewatch a video about steam engines until 2 a.m, sat and watched and asked one question he hadn't planned, and that made Tommy light up. The crescendo built quietly, not with loud scenes, but with a sense that our foundation was sturdier than the noisome spectacle grew around it. Ethan could make posts and shout claims into the public square, but he couldn't sit at our dinner table and laugh with us when a tiny plastic engine barreled across the floor. He wasn't in the small, private victories, the ones that don't get photographed for an aesthetic grid, but matter more than any posed snapshot. One night, when the city was slow and the air smelled like rain, Noah and I sat on the stoop and watched Tommy line up his engines by size on the threshold like a tiny, deliberate parade. Noah nudged my shoulder. "He's pure joy," he said softly. "He's my brother," I said, voice thick with the quiet of a person who has given up something polished for something true. And I wouldn't trade this for 1,000 perfect photos. Noah smiled, and the smile didn't demand anything in return. It simply agreed. Time passed quietly, in that deceptively ordinary way that only feels significant when you look back and realize how much weight it carried. The noise around Ethan's campaign of self-pity had dulled. The hashtags that once hummed with his version of events faded into digital dust, replaced by whatever new scandal the internet had to metabolize. At home, we built small, deliberate rituals. Sunday breakfasts that involved too many pancakes, trips to the used bookshop where Tommy negotiated prices like a tiny economist, evenings where Noah and I would read on opposite sides of the couch while Tommy constructed cities out of train tracks between us. It wasn't exciting, and that was the point. Stability had become the most radical form of happiness I could imagine. When the court mailed the final notice confirming the restraining order's permanence, I didn't frame it or celebrate. I folded the letter neatly, slid it into a drawer, and felt something unclench in my chest. The threat had become paperwork, still real, but no longer ruling our hours. Tommy thrived. His library supervisor offered him a small paid position cataloging the local history section. Watching him wear an employee badge, grinning and earnest, was its own quiet vindication. All the noise Ethan had tried to summon, the accusations, the crowdfunding pleas, had been meant to erase this. The truth of a brother who mattered, who had worth that didn't need defending. Noah was there through all of it, never intrusive, always steady. One evening, while we washed dishes, he said, "You know, people talk about healing like it's this dramatic transformation, but most of the time it's just the sink not overflowing, the dinner not burning, the day ending quietly." He was right. Healing looked like ordinary life doing what it's supposed to. By late spring, Ethan's lawsuit threats fizzled. His lawyer withdrew, citing lack of actionable grounds. Someone leaked the detail online, and his last remaining supporters scattered with the kind of embarrassed silence that follows when the performance loses its audience. I didn't celebrate that either. I just turned off notifications, closed the laptop, and took Tommy for ice cream. That night, on the walk home, Tommy asked, "Does this mean it's over?" "Almost," I said. "But the good part, the part where we get to live, has already started." He nodded like someone who understood more than people gave him credit for, then added quietly, "Then we should keep going." And we did. Summer arrived like a promise kept. Noah took us to the coast one weekend, a drive that smelled of salt and coffee. We stood at the edge of the water, wind loud enough to swallow conversation. Tommy raced the waves, laughing, the horizon wide and clean. Noah slipped his hand into mine, not dramatic, not asking for permission, just fitting there. "You built something real," he said. I watched the water catch the sun and thought about how every choice, the canceled wedding, the courtroom, the long nights of doubt, had led to this stretch of quiet. "I didn't build it alone," I said. He smiled. "Maybe not, but you were the one who stopped pretending the scaffolding was a home." That line stayed with me, because in the end, the story wasn't about revenge or even justice. It was about truth, the kind you have to carve out of noise until it finally fits the shape of your life. Ethan could keep his narratives, his curated pain, his audience that flickered in and out. What we had was smaller, but it was real. Pancakes and train tracks, sea wind and laughter. The knowledge that peace isn't cinematic, it's domestic. And that's where it ends. Not with a headline, but with the soft click of the front door closing behind us, the smell of dinner on the stove, and the quiet certainty that we made it out intact.